My wife and brother spilled their darkest secret while I was in a coma, not knowing I could hear everything. And I want to tell you about the 11 days I spent listening before I woke up. I had been in a car accident. The accident had been a head-on collision. The accident had put me in a coma for 11 days. The doctors had been telling my family I had been not likely to wake up. The doctors had been wrong about that. The thing about comas is specific. Some people in comas can hear what is happening around them. I had been in a state where my brain had been processing auditory input. I had been not able to respond. I had been able to hear. I had been able to remember. My wife was named Petra. Petra and I had been married for 6 years. My brother was named Dante. Dante was 3 years younger than me. Dante had been my best friend for my entire life. The first conversation I had heard was on day 3. Petra and Dante had been alone in the room. Petra said, "Do you think he is going to wake up?" Dante said, "The doctors are saying probably not." Petra said, "What are we going to do?" Dante said, "We are going to wait, and then we are going to figure it out." The second conversation had been on day 5. Petra said, "I have been thinking about telling him." Dante said, "About us?" Petra said, "Yes." Dante said, "The affair has been going on for 2 years. The time to tell him was 18 months ago. The not telling has been the cover." Petra said, "I know. I had been processing the fact that my wife had been having an affair with my brother for 2 years." The third conversation had been on day 7. The conversation had been about my will. Petra said, "The will leaves everything to me." Dante said, "And you and I are together?" Petra said, "Yes." Dante said the number. The number had been my net worth at the time. The number had been approximately $3.8 million. The fourth conversation had been on day 9. The conversation had been the most chilling of the 11 days. Petra said, "The doctor said we could consider it." Dante said, "How soon?" Petra said, 2 more weeks if there is no improvement." Dante said, "Okay, 2 more weeks." I woke up on day 11. The first thing I saw was Petra. Her eyes were red and swollen. She was holding my hand with both of hers, and when she saw my eyes open, she made this sound. This small, broken sound like something inside her chest cracked open. She leaned over me and put her face right next to mine, and she said, "I thought I lost you. I thought you were gone forever." I had spent 11 days hearing her plan a future that did not include me breathing, and now she was crying over me. Real tears. I squeezed her hand. I looked at her face, this face I had loved for 6 years, and I said, "I am here." That was it. 3 words. And every single one of them cost me something I cannot describe. Keeping my face neutral was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Dante arrived within the hour. He came through the door fast. He hugged me, and he said, "You scared me, man." When Dante pulled away from me and moved around the bed to stand on the other side, his hand touched Petra's lower back as he passed her. It was so quick, just the tips of his fingers brushing against her shirt. No one in the world would have noticed that, but I had 11 days of context. They were comfortable with each other's bodies. Over the next 2 days of hospital recovery, Petra and Dante put on the best show I have ever seen. When my eyes were open and clearly on them, Petra and Dante never once looked at each other. Not once. But when they thought I was asleep, I would open my eyes just a tiny crack every single time. Their eyes found each other. Quick looks across the bed, small nods. On the second day of recovery, Petra went down to the cafeteria. The moment she was out of the room, I reached for the hospital phone. I called Meg. Meg was my oldest friend. She had known me since before Petra. Meg picked up. I said, "Meg, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not react." Then I told her the day 3 conversation, the day 5 conversation, the day 7 conversation, the day 9 conversation, every detail. Meg was silent for a long time after I finished. Then Meg said, "What do you need me to do?" No questions about whether I was sure. She just believed me. I said, "I need you to help me be smarter than both of them for the next few months." Meg said, "Done." About 20 minutes later, Petra came back. She sat on the edge of my hospital bed. She pressed her forehead against mine and she said, "I am going to take such good care of you when we get home. I promise. I am never leaving your side." I looked at this woman who had sat in this room 9 days ago and discussed how soon she could pull the plug on me, and I said, "I know you will." That was the loneliest moment of my life. The person closest to me in the world was a stranger. Knowing while pretending not to know is a kind of alone that I would not wish on anyone. They released me from the hospital 5 days after I woke up. For 2 weeks, I played the role of the grateful recovering husband. I was quiet. I was thankful. I let her fuss over me because that was what a man who did not know anything would do. Every night, Petra slept beside me. She would curl up on her side of the bed and put her hand on my arm, and I would lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. I would replay the day 9 conversation in my head. The casual way they had talked about turning off the machines that were keeping me alive, like they were discussing when to cancel a subscription. People think the hardest part of all this was the anger. It was not. The hardest part was the patience, knowing the truth and choosing every single minute of every single day not to say it. About a week after I got home, I called Meg and asked her to buy me a prepaid phone, pay cash. Meg dropped it off the next day, tucked inside a bag of books. That night, when Petra was in the shower, I used the prepaid phone to call the lawyer. I had found this person through Meg. I told the lawyer about the affair. The lawyer was quiet for a few seconds and then said, "If you can prove the affair, this changes everything about asset division. The state recognizes fault-based divorce." I said, "I can prove it, but I need time. I need them to not know I know." The lawyer said, "Then you need to be the best actor in the world for the next 8 weeks. I almost laughed. I said, "I have been practicing for 11 days already." I started paying attention to everything. Petra would say she was running to the store and then come back 2 hours later with 1 bag. When Dante called the house, Petra would take the phone into the other room. I called Meg. I said, "I need you to do something for me. Petra is going to tell me she is visiting a friend on 3 specific evenings this week. I need you to drive by Dante's apartment and see if her car is there." All 3 nights, Meg drove by Dante's apartment. All 3 nights, Petra's car was parked outside. Meg took photos with timestamps. But the thing that really changed everything was the gym bag. Petra had a gym bag she kept in the closet. One afternoon, I was looking for a heating pad, and I moved the gym bag, and something inside it buzzed. I unzipped it. Inside, underneath a pair of sneakers, was a phone. A second phone. I picked it up and opened it. There was no lock on it. The phone had months of messages between Petra and Dante. There was a message from Petra to Dante from 6 months before my accident. The message said, "If anything ever happened to him, we would be set. The will is airtight." Dante had replied, let us hope it never comes to that. I sat on the floor of that closet and I read that message 4 times. If anything ever happened to him. She had written that 6 months before anything happened to me. I do not think they caused the accident, but I do think they had already done the math of my death long before I was lying in a hospital bed. I took screenshots of every message and sent them all to the lawyer. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it. As the weeks went on, Dante started coming around more. One night he was at our table and he looked at me and he said, I am so glad you are okay. I do not know what I would have done without you. I looked at my brother, the person who had asked how soon they could turn off my life support, and I said, I feel the same way. Those words tasted like poison, but I swallowed them. The plan almost fell apart on a Monday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. Petra walked in from the bedroom and she was holding the prepaid phone. She held it up and she said, what is this? My heart rate went from normal to something that felt like it was trying to break out of my ribs. I had about 2 seconds to come up with something. I said, my physical therapist recommended I get a separate phone for health tracking apps. Something about keeping notifications separate so I actually follow the recovery program. I said it calm, like I was a little embarrassed I had not mentioned it. Petra stared at me. She said, you could have just told me. I said, I forgot. I have been forgetting a lot of things since the accident. That was the card I played, the brain injury card, and it worked. I went to the other bathroom and I gripped the edges of the sink with both hands until my knuckles turned white. I had just come within about 10 seconds of losing everything. I needed to move faster. 2 days later, I drove to Meg's apartment. The lawyer was already there. The lawyer sat across from me and said, the fault-based divorce filing is ready. We have the evidence documented. The lawyer looked at me and said, once you file, she will know. She will call him. They will coordinate a story. You need to be prepared for that. I said, I have been prepared since day 3 of an 11-day coma. Thursday was the earliest the papers could be served. I said Thursday was perfect. Then Dante did something I was not ready for. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell rang and Dante was standing there alone. He sat down on the couch. He was quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he said, I need to talk to you about something. My entire body went cold. Dante looked up at me and his eyes were wet. He started crying. He said, when you were in the coma, I said things to Petra, things I should not have said. I told her I had feelings for her. I told her while you were dying, I am the worst person alive. And right there, in that moment, I understood exactly what was happening. This was not a real confession. This was a partial confession. He was admitting to having feelings. He was not admitting to the 2-year affair. He was not admitting to the financial planning. He was not admitting to the day 9 conversation about life support. He was giving me a small truth to cover the big one. This was damage control dressed up as honesty. So I let him. I looked at my brother and I said, that must have been hard to carry. Dante wiped his face. He said, you are too good to me. I told Dante it was okay. I said every word he needed to hear to believe he was safe. He hugged me before he left. That evening, my prepaid phone buzzed. It was Meg. She said, Petra was at Dante's apartment again today. 3 hours. They were arguing on the balcony. I could not hear everything, but I heard Petra say, he cannot find out. Not now. Not ever. I said, she is right about one thing. It will not be now. It will be Thursday. Meg said, are you ready? I said, I have been ready. The night before the filing, Petra and I went to bed at the normal time. She crawled under the covers and she pressed against me. She put her head on my chest and her arm across my stomach and she said, I love you. You know that, right? I put my hand on her back. I said, I know. I lay there until 3 in the morning. I was thinking about the word love. I was thinking about how that word should not be allowed to mean so many different things. It should not be the same word when a mother holds her baby and when a woman lies to her husband's face every single day for 2 years. I was done guessing. In a few hours, Petra was going to find out what the word meant to me. Thursday morning, I got up at 6. I drove to Meg's apartment. We waited. At 10 in the morning, a process server knocked on the front door of my house and handed Petra a set of divorce papers. The filing listed grounds of adultery. The filing included Meg's time-stamped photos, the screenshots from the second phone, and a signed statement from me detailing every single conversation I overheard during the 11 days I spent in that coma. Within minutes, my regular phone started ringing. Petra called me 17 times in 1 hour. Then Dante called. I picked up this one. He was talking fast, almost out of breath. He said, what are you doing? She is hysterical. What is in those papers? I said, you know what is in those papers. He said, I told you I had feelings. I confessed. I was honest with you. I said, you told me you confessed feelings during the coma. You did not tell me about the 2 years. You did not tell me about the messages on her second phone. You did not tell me about the conversation on day 9 where you asked how soon you could take me off life support. The line went silent. Then Dante said, you heard that? I said, I heard everything. 11 days. Every word, every plan, every dollar amount. He said, I am sorry. I said, no, you are caught. Those are different things. I hung up. About 40 minutes later, someone started pounding on Meg's front door, hard. Petra pushed right past Meg into the apartment. She saw me sitting at the kitchen table and she stopped. She said, you were awake during the coma? I said, no, I was not awake, but I could hear. Her whole face changed. She said, that is not possible. I said, the doctor said it is rare but documented. My brain was processing auditory input the entire time. Petra sat down. Her legs seemed to give out more than she chose to sit. She said, what did you hear? I said, day 3, you asked Dante what you were going to do. Day 5, you discussed the 2-year affair. Day 7, you talked about my will and the $3.8 million. Day 9, you discussed removing me from life support. Do you need me to keep going? She put her hands over her face. She said, I never wanted to hurt you. I said, you wanted me to die. There is a difference between not wanting to hurt someone and wanting them to die so you could keep their money. She dropped her hands and looked at me and said, that is not fair. I said, fair would have been telling me about the affair 2 years ago. Fair would have been letting me choose. You took my choice. You took 2 years of my life. You nearly took the rest of them on day 9. Meg stepped forward. She put a folder on the table between us. She opened it so Petra could see what was inside. The time-stamped photos, the screenshots, all of it. Meg looked at Petra and said, the lawyer has all of this. The filing is done. You should probably call your own lawyer. Petra looked at Meg and said, you helped him do this? Meg did not flinch. She said, he called me from a hospital bed after hearing his wife and brother plan his funeral like it was a business merger. Yes, I helped him. I stood up. I looked at Petra one last time. I said, the lawyer will handle the rest. I do not want want the house. I do not want the furniture. I want what is mine, and I want you gone. Petra's voice cracked and she said, where am I supposed to go? I said, I imagine Dante has room. I walked out of Meg's apartment. I got in the driver's seat. I closed the door. I put both hands on the steering wheel and I sat there for 10 minutes without starting the engine. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just sat there and I breathed and I let the quiet fill up the car. Then I turned the key and I drove. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. The fault-based filing meant Petra received nothing beyond what was legally hers before the marriage. I have not spoken to Dante since that phone call. Our parents called once. My mother said, he is still your brother. I said, he was my brother. Then he chose to be something else. She did not call again. Meg checks in every week. One evening she said, are you okay? Actually okay? I said, I spent 11 days in a bed hearing the 2 people I loved most decide I was worth more dead than alive. I am not okay, but I am honest. And that is more than either of them can say. 6 months later, I was driving and I passed the hospital. I slowed down, but I did not stop. I thought about the 11 days. I thought about how the worst thing that ever happened to me was also the thing that saved my life. Not the accident, the listening. I kept driving.